The morning light poured into the kitchen the same way it had for 30 years, soft, golden, catching in the folds of the old floral curtains Claire refused to replace. They were faded now, the colors dulled, but she said they still held stories. I never asked which ones. She sat across from me, fingers wrapped around that same porcelain cup she always used, the one with the hairline crack running along the side like an old scar. It had been her mother's. Claire never let me throw it away. "Some things," she said once, "don't need fixing to be useful." I poured myself black coffee, leaned back in the wooden chair that creaked under my weight, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time in years, there was no emergency, no court dates, no rehab bills, no police calls in the middle of the night. Just the two of us, sitting in silence. "I think we're finally free," I said. She didn't answer right away. She lifted the cup to her lips, her eyes fixed on the garden outside. But I knew she wasn't seeing the azaleas or the bird bath. She hadn't looked at any of it in a long time. Then she turned to me and smiled. A small, almost tender smile. I felt it soften something in my chest. That's when she opened the leather folder beside her. The sound of paper sliding across the table was sharp, deliberate, like a door closing. I looked down. The word divorce was printed at the top in thick official lettering. My name. Her name. The silence between us, suddenly louder than any argument we'd ever had. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. She said nothing, just pushed the papers closer with her fingers, her expression calm, familiar, too familiar. My hands stayed on the edge of the table. I didn't touch the documents. I stared at them like they might dissolve if I waited long enough. "Why now?" I finally asked. She looked at me again, the smile already gone. In its place, something quieter. Not anger, not sorrow either, just certainty. "Because freedom doesn't mean the same thing to me, Michael." That sentence didn't just land, it settled. It crawled into my chest and found a space I hadn't realized was still raw. We had survived hell together, lost our daughter Sarah in a car crash that shattered every part of us, nearly lost our son Daniel to opioids, watched him crawl back from the edge. We'd sat through funerals, interventions, courtroom hearings. We'd buried more than just a child. We buried parts of ourselves. Now, just as the dust was clearing, she was walking away. The clock ticked above the stove, steady and indifferent. Time doesn't pause for anyone, not even when a marriage is ending in the middle of coffee. She stood slowly, took the cracked cup to the sink, washed it carefully, dried it with a towel embroidered with her grandmother's initials. She placed it gently in the drying rack. Then she walked out of the kitchen, and I sat there staring at the word divorce like it was a death notice. Maybe it was. Not the death of the marriage, but of whatever hope I'd held that we could still find our way back. I didn't move for a long time after she left the room. My coffee went cold. The papers stayed where she'd placed them, like a quiet ultimatum written in legalese. I kept thinking, this must be a test, or a cry for attention. Or maybe she's just tired, but the truth was deeper. And I think in some quiet corner of my mind I already knew it. When I finally stood up, the chair scraped against the tile like a protest. I folded the papers without looking at them again and placed them back inside the folder. My hands were trembling just a little, but enough to feel it. Claire was upstairs. I could hear the soft opening and closing of drawers, the gentle rhythm of someone packing. She wasn't just filing for divorce, she was leaving. And suddenly I remembered a moment from years ago, maybe 15, maybe 20, when we'd gone on a road trip to Vermont. It rained the whole time. Daniel was 12, Sarah was 8. We were crammed into a motel room that smelled like cigarettes, and Claire was brushing Sarah's hair on the edge of the bed, humming something I didn't recognize. That night, she whispered to me, "I don't care about the rain. I just want us to stay dry together." Now, decades later, we were dry, bone dry, cracked, quiet. I went up the stairs slow, like each step might change her mind. She was in the guest room, not our room, folding sweaters into a navy blue suitcase I hadn't seen in years. It still had the old airline tag from our trip to Phoenix in 2011. She looked up when I entered, but didn't stop what she was doing. You're not even going to fight me on it? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. There's nothing to fight, she said, folding a white sweater with deliberate care. We haven't been married in a long time, Michael. We've just been enduring. I felt a flare of anger, but it died just as quickly. She wasn't being cruel. She was being honest. I thought we were getting through it, I said. After everything, after Daniel got clean, after the court finally closed Sarah's case, I thought we could finally breathe. She zipped the suitcase slowly. The sound was final, like stitching shut an old wound. You want to breathe, she said, looking at me. But I've been holding my breath for years. Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. And this is the only way? It's the only honest way. There was a photo on the nightstand, one of Sarah, taken a few weeks before the accident. She was wearing a denim jacket, laughing at something off camera. Claire noticed my eyes drifting to it. I don't blame you for what happened to her, she said quietly. But I can't keep pretending we're still a family. We are a family. She gave a sad smile. No, Michael, we were. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly so tired I could barely hold my head up. I don't know how to start over, I admitted. You don't have to, she said. Just let go. Her words echoed in the small room. Let go. Like it was something easy. Like it was something I could do. She walked past me, suitcase in hand. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. The front door opened a few minutes later, then closed, and just like that, Claire was gone. I stayed in that guest room until the light began to shift, until the shadows stretched long across the hardwood floor, like tired arms reaching for something they'd never hold again. I didn't cry. Not yet. It was too soon for tears. What I felt wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was disorientation, like I'd woken up in a version of my life I didn't recognize. Her scent lingered, lavender and drier sheets. It clung to the edge of the bed, to the sweaters still folded in the open drawer she hadn't taken. She didn't pack everything, just enough. Just enough to let me know she wouldn't be back for more. Downstairs, the silence was almost violent. No footsteps, no hum of the dryer, no dishes clinking in the sink, only the tick of the kitchen clock, each second measured and cruel. I made myself a second cup of coffee, out of habit, not need. I reached for my usual mug, but stopped halfway. My fingers touched the porcelain cup she always used, the cracked one. It was still in the drying rack, clean, waiting. I picked it up carefully, feeling the uneven edge with my thumb. It was absurd, but I brought the cup to the table and poured my coffee into it. And I drank. Like some foolish part of me thought that maybe, just maybe, it would bring her back. That night, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in an old flannel blanket, watching the sky darken. The cicadas were out, their rhythmic buzz rising and falling like breath. It reminded me of the summer Sarah died. Claire had barely left the house. She stayed inside, clutching Sarah's favorite blanket to her chest, like it could anchor her to something. We didn't grieve together, that was the problem. We each found our own corners to hide in. Claire cried behind locked doors. I drove aimlessly, sometimes for hours, until I found a bar I hadn't been to in a while. Daniel. He was just a teenager, and we didn't notice, not really, when he started spending more time out than in. By the time we realized he was using, he was already lost. And now that he was clean, now that he was trying, rebuilding his life with his sponsor's help, holding a steady job, even paying rent for a little place across town, now that we had, in theory, survived. Claire left. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in quiet surrender. The next morning, I called Daniel. He picked up after the second ring. "Dad?" "Hey," I said. I tried to keep my voice even. "You busy?" "Just heading into work. Everything okay?" There was a pause. He always knew when something was off. "She left," I said. "Claire." Another pause, longer this time. "She filed?" "Yeah." Daniel sighed. "You surprised?" I didn't know how to answer that. "I thought we were healing," I finally said. "Maybe she was," he replied. "Just in a different direction." He didn't say it with judgment. Just clarity, like someone who's seen wreckage up close and knows what it takes to walk away from it. "You need me to come by?" he asked. I hesitated. "No, I just needed to say it out loud." "All right. Call me later?" "Yeah." When I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the microwave door. I looked tired. Older than I remembered. That day, I didn't do much. I didn't go into work. I didn't answer emails. I didn't touch the papers she left. But I did find myself walking through the house, pausing in the doorways of rooms we once shared. I opened the drawer where she kept old photos. I found one of our wedding day, us laughing, arms tangled, cake on her cheek. We looked young, so stupidly young. I sat on the floor and stared at it for a long time, and for the first time since she walked out the door, I cried, not for the loss, but for how long it took me to see that it was already gone. The days that followed blurred together like smudged ink on a page that had been left out in the rain. Time didn't stop, it never does, but it slowed, like the world was moving through molasses, and I was watching it from the inside of a glass jar. I avoided people. That part came easily. At the office, I told them Claire was visiting her sister in Oregon. No one questioned it. After all, we weren't the kind of couple who invited a lot of questions. We kept things neat, respectable. From the outside, we looked like two people who'd endured the worst and stayed strong. That was the illusion Claire had finally stopped pretending to believe in. On the fourth evening, I drove past the community center where Sarah used to take ballet. The lights were still on, warm and soft through the windows. Tiny shadows of little girls in leotards danced behind the curtains. For a second I saw her, her messy bun, the way she used to wave at me through the glass with both hands, like her excitement couldn't be contained by one. I parked the car and just sat there, my hands on the steering wheel, the engine humming. I remembered the day she asked me if she could quit ballet. She was 10, said she didn't feel graceful, said she liked science more. Claire was disappointed, but I told her to follow her heart. What I didn't tell her was that I admired her for knowing herself so young, for choosing to leave something, even when it made others uncomfortable, like her mother had done, like I had never done. Back home, I opened the folder Claire had left on the table. I hadn't touched it since the day she slid it toward me. The legal language was precise and cold. She had already signed. All I had to do was follow through. And I couldn't, not yet, not without understanding how we got here. That night I went into our old bedroom. Her closet door stood slightly ajar. Half of her clothes were still inside. Maybe she'd come back for them. Maybe not. I found one of her sweaters, the green one with the soft collar, and sat down on the edge of the bed, holding it close. I don't know what I was looking for. Scent, memory, remnants. There's a strange kind of intimacy in holding someone's absence. Later, I found myself in the attic, searching. I didn't know what I was looking for until I found it. A cardboard box marked Sarah Hospital. Inside were drawings, get-well cards, a pink notebook with her name in uneven letters. I flipped through the notebook slowly. One page caught my eye. "When I get out, I want to go to the beach with Mommy and Daddy. Just us." I closed the notebook and pressed it against my chest. We never made it to the beach. She never made it out of that hospital. Claire used to cry herself to sleep during those months, and I drank. That was the part I didn't want to admit. Not to her. Not even to myself. I didn't just grieve badly. I abandoned her in the middle of her grief. And somehow I thought surviving together was enough. But now, with the house echoing and her voice gone from the hallways, I realized surviving together isn't the same as healing together. Maybe we had stopped trying to find each other years ago. And maybe, in her own quiet way, Claire had just found the courage to say it first. I couldn't sleep that night. The bed felt foreign, like I'd wandered into someone else's life and laid down in their memories. I kept turning, flipping the pillow over, reaching for a body that wasn't there. By 4 a.m. I was downstairs in the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile floor, staring at the cracked porcelain cup again. I didn't pour coffee this time. I just sat with it, let the silence stretch. The crack in the cup reminded me of something Sarah once said when she was 7. She dropped her juice glass and started crying before it even hit the floor. Claire and I rushed in, thinking she was hurt, but she wasn't. She kept sobbing and saying, "It was my favorite, I didn't mean to break it." And Claire knelt down and held her face gently. "Sweetheart, sometimes we break things even when we don't mean to. That doesn't make you bad, just human." That moment had stuck with me all these years, I think because deep down I knew I'd broken something too, and I never apologized for it. I picked up the phone. Claire didn't answer. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The next day, Daniel came over without asking. He brought 2 coffees and a quiet presence. He sat on the porch with me like he used to when he was trying to detox at home in those early, brutal days. No words, just breathing. After a while, he asked, "Do you want her back?" The question hit harder than I expected. "Yes," I said before I could think. Then, softer, "But I don't know if I deserve to ask for that." He nodded slowly, his eyes on the street. "Sometimes I wonder the same thing about you and Mom, about us, what I put you through. You were a kid, Daniel, and you were a father." That silence that followed wasn't angry. It was filled with something heavier. Truth, maybe. He turned to me. "You think she left because of what happened with Sarah and me?" I didn't answer right away. "She left," I finally said, "because I stopped showing her I knew she was still here." Claire had endured. She'd made meals, organized bills, sat in waiting rooms for both our kids, and carried her grief like a second skin. And I'd been there physically. But emotionally, I think I went missing after Sarah died, and by the time I tried to come back, she'd already learned to live without me. Daniel looked at me like he understood something I hadn't put into words yet. He reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. "She left this with me. Told me to give it to you when it felt right." I took the envelope with both hands, careful not to tear it. It was Claire's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Elegant, always slanting slightly to the left. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Michael, you're not a bad man, just a tired one. I know that now, but tiredness isn't an excuse for distance, for silence, for letting the small daily kindnesses die. I loved you. I still do in a way. But I can't keep living in a house where grief became the only language we speak. Please don't let this make you smaller. Let it break you open instead. Let it soften you. You have more love to give. Just not to me. Not anymore." Claire. I read the letter 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. Daniel didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. I looked up at the sky. The sun was finally starting to warm the porch. I thought about that word she used, soften. Maybe that was what real freedom was, not walking away, but being willing to feel again, even if it hurt. The letter stayed on the nightstand for days. I didn't reread it. I didn't have to. The words had already carved themselves into my chest like initials on an old oak tree, permanent, crooked, and weathered by time. I kept reaching for my wedding ring without realizing I wasn't wearing it anymore. That habit, that ghost of a gesture, was harder to kill than I expected. One afternoon, I went to the shed behind the house, where things we didn't know what to do with always ended up. Claire's gardening tools were still hanging in neat rows. The blue gloves she used to wear were draped over a wooden crate. She hadn't touched them in over a year. I remember the summer after Sarah died. Claire spent hours out there, pruning, digging, planting things that never seemed to grow. Once I asked her why she kept at it. She said, "Because if I don't put my hands in the dirt, I won't feel real." Now her gloves were dusty and stiff. The flowers she planted had stopped blooming years ago. That night, I found myself flipping through old home videos. I hadn't watched them in a decade. Our living room back when it was filled with laughter. Sarah singing off-key. Daniel running around in his Spider-Man pajamas. Claire laughing behind the camera, her voice young, carefree. I paused the video when she said, "Come here, Michael. Say hi." On the screen, I waved awkwardly, holding a toddler Daniel on my hip. I looked tired, but there was joy in my face. Real joy. That version of me felt like a stranger, and that woman behind the lens, the way she said my name, it sounded like love. I shut the laptop. The silence afterward was deafening. I realized I'd been afraid of stillness for a long time. That's why I filled our days with errands, repairs, distractions, anything to avoid the ache of what we'd lost. But Claire had always known how to sit with the ache. She never ran from it. She just wanted me to sit beside her in it. And I didn't, not really. So now, I sat alone, and for the first time, I didn't try to escape it. I let it burn. The next morning, I took the cracked porcelain cup off the shelf and brought it with me into the garden. I sat in the patch of overgrown grass where Claire once planted rosemary and basil. The soil was dry. I didn't know what I was doing. I dug a shallow hole with my hands. The dirt got under my nails into the creases of my palms. Then I placed the cup inside, nestled it carefully. It wasn't a grave, not exactly. It was a marker for something we tried to hold, something we dropped, and something I would never pretend wasn't beautiful, flawed and fragile and real. When I stood up, the sunlight hit my face like a baptism. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a man waiting for someone to return. I felt like a man beginning to understand why she left. The days grew quieter but not emptier. There's a difference. In the beginning, her absence had weight. It pressed against the walls of every room. But now it moved differently, softer somehow, like fog instead of thunder. I started walking in the mornings, not for exercise, not to escape, just to feel my feet on the ground, to breathe. There's a park a few blocks from our house, where we used to take Sarah on Saturdays. She loved the swings, even as she got older. Said it made her feel like time was slowing down. I hadn't been back there in years. But one morning, I walked the familiar path under the canopy of old oaks and found the swings still creaking in the wind, the rust stains on the chains exactly as I remembered. I sat on one, not to swing, just to sit, and closed my eyes. It was strange, how grief didn't show up like a tidal wave anymore. It came in fragments, a song at the grocery store, the way the light hit the window at a certain angle, the scent of lavender from someone's passing perfume. Memories of Sarah were softer now, less like knives, more like photographs that had faded but not disappeared. Claire, though, she was everywhere. In the cupboards, the laundry, the way I still turned to speak to her out of habit when something on the news caught my attention. I caught myself whispering her name more than once. That evening, Daniel came over again. He brought dinner, like he used to when he was trying to earn back our trust. But this time, he didn't seem nervous. Just present. We sat on the porch with takeout containers between us. The cicadas were loud, and the sky was turning orange around the edges. "She's doing okay," he said after a while without looking at me. "You've seen her?" He nodded. "She called me last week. Asked if I needed anything." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "And?" "She's staying with Aunt Marla. Says she might get her own place soon. She sounds lighter." I nodded slowly, unsure whether that word was a gift or a wound. "I don't think she's angry, Dad, just done." "Yeah," I whispered, "I know." He was quiet for a while, then added, "She also said you'd probably try to fix everything, that it's what you do." I looked at him. "And?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "And I told her maybe that's not such a bad thing, as long as you know some things aren't yours to fix." That stuck with me. After he left, I sat in the kitchen, alone with my thoughts, and pulled out a pen. Not a keyboard, not a screen, just paper. And I began to write. "Claire, I didn't know what I didn't know. That's the hardest part. I thought presence was enough, that staying was enough. But I see now, it wasn't. You wanted someone to witness you, to hold your pain, not just carry mine. I'm sorry I made you invisible when you were screaming in silence. You were never just a mother or a caretaker or a woman who survived alongside me. You were the soul of this house, the only reason it had warmth, even in its coldest hours. And I see now why you had to go, not to punish me, but to reclaim yourself. I hope you find what you couldn't hear. I hope you plant something that grows. I didn't know if I'd send it, but for the first time, I wrote not to change the past, but to honor it, No call, no letter, no sign she'd read what I wrote. And yet, every morning, I checked the mailbox, like a man hoping for a miracle wrapped in an envelope. I didn't send the letter. I couldn't. Not yet. Something in me said it wasn't ready. Or maybe I wasn't. But I kept writing, not just to Claire, but to Sarah, to Daniel, to myself. The pages stacked up in a drawer beside the bed. Unsent, unread, but necessary. Writing didn't fix anything, but it made the silence less hollow. One Sunday, I found myself in the basement cleaning out boxes, not because I needed the space, but because I needed to face the mess I'd buried for years. That's where I found the tape recorder. Old, dusty, but still working. Claire had used it years ago when she was interviewing her mother about their family history. I pressed play, unsure of what I'd hear. Her voice came through, young, focused, with the soft authority she always had when she was curious about something. "Tell me about the dress, Mama, the one you wore to church that day." Then her mother's voice, trembling, slow, southern. "I wore that green one, with the little flowers near the hem. You used to hide in it when you were scared, remember?" I listened to them talk for 20 minutes. Stories about gardens, weddings, how they'd survived hard winters in Tennessee, how they didn't speak for 2 years after Claire's father died, how forgiveness came in the form of a pie left on the doorstep. When the tape clicked to a stop, I sat there in the dark, the player in my lap, heart aching with the realization. Claire came from women who knew how to survive, how to carry silence until it softened. And I'd come from men who believed that endurance was love, that not leaving was the same as showing up. We were never speaking the same language. That night I looked through old emails, photos. Then I found the video from Sarah's last birthday. She was turning 15. Daniel had just gotten out of his first stint in rehab. Claire had convinced him to come to the party. He sat in the corner, eyes sunken but sober, clapping along as she blew out the candles. Claire leaned down and kissed Sarah's cheek right before the screen faded to black. I rewound it, watched it again and again. I couldn't stop thinking about that kiss, the way Claire had leaned in, so gentle, so full of presence. Not for the camera, not for anyone else, just for our daughter. It hit me that I hadn't kissed Claire like that in years, not with awareness, not with gratitude, not with anything real. I had loved her, yes, but I had stopped showing it. The next morning I drove out to her sister Marla's house. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't bring flowers. Just a copy of the letter sealed in an envelope and a small clay pot with rosemary, the only thing still alive from Claire's old garden. Marla answered the door. Her eyes softened when she saw me. She didn't say much, just nodded and stepped aside. Claire was in the backyard under a large oak tree reading. I walked slowly. She looked up, surprised, but not startled. I didn't speak right away. I just offered her the pot of rosemary and the envelope. She took them both in silence, then looked at me. Her eyes held 1,000 memories. Good ones, hard ones, real ones. "I'm not asking for anything," I said, my voice low. "I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see you." She nodded. That was all. No embrace, no promises, just presence. And in that moment, for the first time since she left, I felt close to her again. Not as a husband, but as a man who had finally learned how to witness. After handing her the letter and the rosemary, I sat with Claire for a few quiet minutes beneath the oak tree. She didn't open the envelope while I was there. She didn't speak more than a few words, but her silence didn't feel like distance this time. It felt like something settling into place. When I stood to leave, she reached out and touched my wrist lightly, not to stop me, just a gesture, a moment, like saying, "I heard you," without needing to say anything at all. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, not joy, not relief, just peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting the story for what it isn't and accept it for what it became. I didn't expect her to call, but a week later, she did. "Hi," she said, like it hadn't been months, like we'd just spoken yesterday. "Hi," I answered, standing in the kitchen, barefoot, the house quiet as always. I read your letter. My heart slowed. Yeah? Yes. Silence stretched, but I didn't try to fill it. I'd learned that much at least. I don't know what it means yet, she continued, but I wanted to say thank you. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. You don't owe me that. I'm not saying it because I owe you. I'm saying it because I meant it. There it was again. That same honesty that had startled me that morning. She slid the papers across the table. Claire had always known how to speak truths I couldn't touch. I'm trying to grow the rosemary, she added, and I could hear a smile in her voice. We'll see if it forgives me. It's a forgiving plant, I said. Another pause. Then she said something that caught me off guard. Do you remember the sweater I left in the guest room? The green one? Yeah, it's still there. Can you send it to me? There was something fragile in the request. Not sentimental, not emotional, just real. The kind of request that says, I still remember who I was when I wore that. Of course, I said. After we hung up, I sat in the guest room with the green sweater folded in my lap. I thought of her wearing it on autumn mornings, reading at the table, humming softly. She never made a fuss about the past, but she wore it like a second skin. I packed the sweater in a small box, careful to include a note. Just a short line, still warm. I mailed it the next day, and then I returned to my life. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't clinging to what could be, but I was making space for what might. Daniel visited more often. He started opening up about his own recovery in ways he never had before. We talked about Sarah more too, not just the good memories, but the hard ones, the hospital, the guilt, the way each of us carried a piece of her death into every room we walked into afterward. I used to think if I could make you proud, Daniel said once, it would make up for everything. You don't have to make anything up, I told him. You just have to live. He nodded, eyes red, jaw clenched against something he didn't want to say out loud. But I knew. We were all carrying ghosts. Some days I missed Claire so much I thought I might call her. But I didn't. I let her have her space. And I kept tending to mine. One morning I walked back to the spot where I'd buried the porcelain cup. To my surprise, a tiny sprig of green was poking through the dirt. I didn't plant anything, not intentionally, but something had taken root anyway. It wasn't much, just a sprig. A whisper of life where I'd left something broken, but I found myself visiting it every day, not to water it, not to pull weeds, just to watch. I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want to name it. I just wanted to be there. That's something Claire used to say when the kids were young and we were overwhelmed and out of sync. You don't have to fix everything, Michael. Just be here with me. And I never truly understood what that meant until it was too late. One Saturday, a letter arrived in the mail. Not a bill, not junk, it was from Claire. Her handwriting on the envelope stopped me cold. I turned it over in my hands like it might vanish if I moved too fast. I opened it in the kitchen, standing right where she had slid the divorce papers across the table. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten in ink that bled slightly in the corners, like she'd pressed the pen too hard. Michael? It took me time to respond. I needed to feel what it meant to be apart from you, not in anger but in truth. I needed to know if silence could feel like freedom, or if it was just another kind of ache. It's both, I think. I want you to know I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I stopped recognizing myself in the spaces we used to share, and staying would have meant becoming smaller, quieter, less. You were never cruel, just distant. And that kind of distance makes the air thinner with every year. I read your letter more than once, and I felt it. I really did. You're learning to witness. That's the word you used. And I believe you. I don't know what the future looks like for us. I'm not writing to reopen anything, but I do want you to know something. The sweater you sent, it smelled like the house, like rosemary, like old mornings. I cried when I opened the box. Not because I missed you, but because I missed who I was when I still believed you could see me. That version of me, she's coming back now, slowly, quietly. And I think, maybe, you're finding your way back to yourself too. I hope you keep writing. Not to win me back, but because your voice still matters. Even if it's just to you. Claire. I stood there for a long time after I finished reading. Then I sat down, and I cried. But this time, it wasn't for what I'd lost. It was for what I'd finally begun to understand. The pain of becoming invisible in your own marriage, the slow death of intimacy by silence, the quiet courage it takes to leave, not in anger, but in honesty. Later that evening, I returned to the garden. The sprig had grown half an inch. I knelt beside it, fingers brushing the soil, and whispered, "I see you." And this time I meant it, not to the plant, but to her. And maybe, finally, to myself. Autumn came. The leaves turned amber and rust-colored, littering the backyard with reminders that everything changes, sometimes gently, sometimes all at once. I didn't rake them. Claire always did. She found peace in the rhythm of it. I used to tease her about it, asking why she bothered when the wind would undo her work in hours. She'd just smile and say, "It's not about clearing the yard, it's about being present." Back then I didn't understand. I was always rushing, fixing, organizing, hoping to finish one thing so I could move on to the next. But now, I let the leaves fall. I let the earth be messy. One afternoon, while sorting through an old chest in the attic, I found a sealed envelope labeled Sarah, to open when you're 18. It was in Claire's handwriting. I sat down on the floor holding the letter like it might break. Sarah never turned 18, she died at 15. I opened it. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you're an adult now. Maybe not in all the ways that matter, but enough. Enough to begin asking your own questions about love, about pain, about why people stay and why they leave. Your father and I, we're flawed. We've tried our best, but we've made mistakes. Some you may have seen. Others we'll carry quietly, hoping you never feel the weight of them. But know this, you were wanted, you were cherished, and no matter what unfolds in this life, you are never the product of our shortcomings. You are your own story. And if one day you find yourself heartbroken, by family, by someone you love, by the world itself, remember that grief is not something to escape. It's something to walk through, one day at a time. You are stronger than you know, my girl. And you are loved, even in silence. Love, Mom, I didn't realize I was weeping until the ink blurred in my vision. Claire had written to a daughter who'd never get to read her words. A mother's hope, folded and stored, like a prayer for a future that never arrived. I placed the letter in a small wooden box, along with one of Sarah's hair clips and a photo of the three of us from her 10th birthday. Then I carried it to the garden and buried it near the place I'd laid the cracked porcelain cup. It felt right, like a soft kind of ceremony. The next day I wrote Claire again, not asking for anything, just sharing. "Claire, I found your letter to Sarah. I hope you don't mind that I opened it. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. I buried it in the garden with some of her things. It felt like the only thing I could do that mattered. You always knew how to speak to her heart, to all of ours, really. I'm trying to live differently now, not loudly, just awake. I walk every morning. I sit with the trees. I listen. Even when there's nothing to hear, the sprig is still growing. So am I. I didn't expect her to write back, but she did. This time the envelope was thinner. Just a note card, no salutation. Thank you for burying the letter. That means more than I can say. And thank you for letting the leaves stay on the ground. They were always beautiful to me, just like that. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Daniel showed up unannounced. He had that look, eyebrows tight, jaw working a little harder than usual. I knew something was coming before he even opened his mouth. "Mom's moving out," he said, standing in the entryway, hands in his pockets. I nodded slowly. "She told you?" "Yeah. Signed a lease yesterday. Little house near the lake. 2 bedrooms, tiny porch, creaky floorboards. She says it feels like her." I smiled, though it hurt. "That sounds like her. She wants to know if you'd like to come see it." That caught me off guard. "What?" "She didn't want to ask you herself. Said she wasn't sure if it would be too hard for either of you." I sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, the same place I used to sit when I was waiting for Claire to finish putting the kids to bed so we could talk about bills or plans or what we'd forgotten to buy at the store. "I don't want to intrude," I said. "She has a new life now." Daniel sat beside me, arms resting on his knees. "Dad, she's not trying to erase you. She just needed to find herself again. You were both drowning. She just swam first." That image stayed with me. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then I said, "I'll come." The house was small, quaint, in that intentional way some places are. The porch sagged slightly, the paint was chipped around the windows, and the yard was wild with growth. But it breathed. Claire met me outside. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back, soft and undone. She looked lighter, not happier, not over anything, just rooted. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice even. "Thanks for asking." She led me inside. The walls were bare, boxes still lined the hallway. But on the kitchen table sat the rosemary I had given her, now in a bigger pot reaching upward. Near it, the cracked porcelain cup. "You kept it," I said quietly. She nodded. "Not because it's pretty, but because it survived." We didn't talk about the divorce. We didn't talk about what had been lost. We walked through the rooms and she showed me where she planned to read, where she wanted to hang a painting her mother once gave her. She pointed to an empty corner and said, "Maybe a chair there, one that hugs you." At one point she paused in front of a small bookshelf and said, almost to herself, "It's the first place I've chosen for myself." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to fix, only something to witness. Before I left, she walked me to the porch. We stood there a long time, the breeze moving through the trees. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me something, a small folded piece of paper. "You don't need to read it now," she said, "but I wanted you to have it." I waited until I got home. Inside was a single line, "I see you too." That was all. But it was everything. After that visit, something shifted, not between us necessarily, but inside me. Her new house had no trace of our past, and yet it wasn't a rejection. It was an affirmation. Claire wasn't erasing the life we'd shared. She was simply choosing not to carry its full weight anymore. And I understood that now. I didn't call her after that. I didn't want to make the mistake of rushing into new closeness as a replacement for what was gone. I gave her space. And quietly, I continued the small rituals of my new life. I replanted part of the garden. I reread her note once, just once. And then I placed it in the same box where Sarah's photos were kept, not as a relic but as part of the story. One rainy evening, Daniel and I cooked dinner together. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. He stood at the stove while I chopped onions, and somewhere in the middle of our quiet work he said, "I think I'm ready to write Mom a letter." I looked at him. "Yeah. She forgave me a long time ago," he said, "but I never told her what that meant. I was too ashamed." "She knows," I said softly. "Still," he replied, "she deserves to hear it." Later that night, he sat at the dining table and wrote for nearly an hour. I didn't ask to read it. When he finished, he sealed it in an envelope and set it down with care. "She gave us space," he said. "Now I want to offer her something back. My voice." His words echoed something I had felt for months but hadn't said aloud. We'd all been silent for too long. A few days later, I drove past Claire's street but didn't stop. I only wanted to see the little house again, just the outline of it, the roofline against the sky. Proof that she was okay. I didn't expect to see her, but she was there, kneeling in the front yard, hands in the soil, planting something new. She looked up and she smiled. Not a wave, not a summons, just a smile. Soft, real, a recognition. I slowed the car. Our eyes met for a second. I thought of the morning she'd smiled at me across our kitchen table, just before she slid the divorce papers toward me. How different this smile was. It held no finality, no irony, no sting, only peace, only presence. I didn't stop the car. I kept driving, not out of avoidance, but because that moment didn't need anything more. Some stories don't circle back. Some stories breathe and stretch and let go. When I got home, I returned to the garden. The sprig had grown into a low, fragrant bush, not quite wild, but not tamed either. I knelt beside it, brushing the tips of my fingers through its leaves. Then I lit a small candle and placed it at the base of the rosemary, not as a ritual, but as a thank you, for everything we tried, for everything we lost, and for the space we gave each other to survive. Thanksgiving came and went with little ceremony. Daniel joined me for dinner, just the two of us, a roasted chicken instead of turkey, and more silence than conversation. But it was a warm silence, one that had stopped being heavy. After we finished eating, he cleared the plates while I poured 2 cups of coffee. I reached for the cracked porcelain cup out of habit, then paused. And I chose a different one. I was learning that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant honoring what was while allowing what is to take shape. Daniel noticed. He smiled, said nothing. That night, as he left, he turned at the door and asked, "Do you think you and Mom will ever, become friends again?" I thought about that for a long moment. "I think we're becoming something," I said. "I just don't know the name for it yet." He nodded. "Maybe it doesn't need one." And he was right. Some things, like forgiveness, like quiet recognition, live best unnamed. The following week, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Claire's handwriting on the front. Inside was a photograph. It was her new garden. A narrow strip of dark soil lined with tiny green shoots. A handwritten note beneath the photo read, "They're growing. Slowly. But they're alive." Underneath that, in smaller letters, "So are we." I stared at the picture for a long time, then pinned it on the fridge beside a faded photo of Sarah on the swings. 2 gardens, 2 lives. 2 people growing in different soil, but still somehow reaching toward the light. A few days later, I returned to the park. I sat on the same swing where Sarah used to sit. The breeze was light. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves. An older couple walked by, holding hands. A little girl skipped ahead of them, laughing. Life was moving, as it always does. I didn't feel left behind anymore. I felt grounded. A man passed by walking his dog and nodded politely. I nodded back. Then I took out my notebook, not to write a letter, not to make sense of anything, just to capture what it felt like to sit still and feel. I wrote 1 sentence. Sometimes survival looks like planting again after everything has burned. And then I closed the notebook and simply sat. The sun dipped lower, the wind shifted, and I let myself miss her, not with desperation but with grace. Winter came quietly that year. The first snowfall dusted the roof like powdered sugar, softening the edges of everything. The world looked cleaner, simpler, as if grief itself had curled up to rest under a white blanket. I kept walking. Through the cold, through the short days, through the early dark. One morning just after Christmas, Daniel invited both me and Claire for brunch. He didn't ask. He simply said, "It's time." I arrived first. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something citrus. I helped him set the table. 3 plates, 3 mugs, nothing formal. When Claire walked in, her scarf still dusted with snow, we looked at each other for a breath too long, not out of discomfort, but out of mutual recognition. It had been nearly 6 months since she left. She took off her coat and stepped inside like someone returning to a familiar place, not to reclaim it, but to acknowledge what had once been shared. We ate slowly, talked about the weather, about Daniel's job, about a new book she'd read. The conversation stayed light, but the atmosphere was different. It wasn't forced, it wasn't pretending. There was no ring on my finger, no ring on hers, but there was something between us again. Not marriage, not regret, just warmth. When we finished, Daniel cleared the plates and said he had to run to the store for milk. I gave him a look. He grinned and shrugged, leaving us alone. Claire sipped her coffee, staring out the window. "He's doing better," she said. "Yeah," I nodded. "So are we." She glanced at me, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "You always did jump to conclusions." I smiled. Not a conclusion, just an observation. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then I said, Thank you for that last note. She nodded. Thank you for letting me go without turning it into a war. I didn't respond right away. I let the weight of her words settle. Then I said, I didn't know how to fight for you the right way. Maybe I still don't. But I do know I want you to be okay, even if I'm not part of that picture. She looked down at her cup, then back at me. I never stopped wishing you well, she said, even when I couldn't stay. There was no grand moment, no hug, no second chance sealed with a kiss. Just two people sitting in the middle of a life they had built, then unbuilt, with dignity, with pain, and finally, with peace. As we stood to leave, she reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a photo. Our garden, my garden now, the rosemary bush, full and green, dusted with snow, a tiny ceramic marker stuck into the soil with one word etched into it. Still. She had visited, quietly, without announcement. And she had left a sign, not for reconciliation, but for remembrance. We hugged gently at the door, no promises, no plans, just presence. I watched her walk down the snowy path to her car. She turned once, smiled. Anne drove away. I went back inside, sat in the living room, held the photo to my chest and whispered thank you for what we were, for what we survived, and for what we gave back to each other in the end. If this story touched something deep inside you, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your voice. Have you ever had to let go of someone you still loved, or forgiven someone who never said they were sorry? Don't just scroll past. Your story matters here. Share this video with someone who might need it today. Someone carrying silence or holding on to what they were never given. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. These stories are for you, for all of us trying to make sense of the love, the loss, and the quiet in between. Now don't go just yet. The next story is already waiting for you, right there on the screen. Click it, and I'll meet you in the next chapter.